280 days ago, I started building this vertical style Paludarium in my Exoterra 45 by 45 by 90 centimeter tank. I designed it specifically to keep, breed and observe a very rare species of vampire crab, Geosesarma Notophorum. One of the rarer, more difficult species of vampire crab to keep. I don't generally do tank update videos all that often, but quite a lot has happened since I set up this tank and since I published the last video. And I've learned quite a lot more about Geosesarma Notophorum as well. I included this information in the species profile I made recently as well, so that video is still accurate and fully up to date. But in this video, I'm going to show you some of the big environmental changes that I've made to this tank to better accommodate Geosesarma Notophorum's needs. But before we start that, I'm just going to do a little recap on exactly how we got here, because it's been quite a big journey. My goal for this build was to keep it as organic as possible, so I started with some corkboard sheets and siliconed them onto the side of the glass. Once they were in place, I built them up a little bit, then sanded them down to add quite a lot of texture and make it a little bit more 3D. Then I added my filter into the back of the tank and filled everything with some nice clean white quartz sand. After I added the sand in, I added maple stone as my primary hardscape for the base of the tank. In order to add a water feature to the top of the tank, I created this little half pot to hold water and be the base for my waterfall. Siliconed it into place as well, then routed the water tubing up from the base of the tank. You can see a little description of what it looked like from the top just here. After I had the base of the waterfall in place, I added cork bark to the background as well as some clay to give it a really natural look. This plays a key role in keeping things organic, and I opted to use no spray foam in this build. Once the background was complete, I added some organic details to the base of the tank, so a little bit of wood, some bark, plenty of leaves, and obviously a lot of soil. After completing the base of the tank, I started to plant everything, and I have quite a large selection of plants, which you can check out in the original video. And for this build, I opted for some wild type ISOPODS. Finally, after more than 100 days of planning, I added my Geosesarma Notophorum to the tank. Here's a little overview of the entire tank and how it progressed from start to finish. The light I'm using for this tank is a Syncore Optima 30cm, and I also have a custom do-it-yourself ventilation system with a temp controller to control the environment. We also have a waterfall running through the middle. The background is made entirely out of corkboard and cork bark, and the hardscape option I use for the stones is maple stone. You can find a full list of plants linked in the description. And finally, the tank is heated with a heat mat which is underneath the Exoterra. Unlike a lot of tanks, there's enough space for this to be added safely. After converting the tank from a Paludarium to a vivarium, most of it remained the same. However, I did remove the water feature and thus the waterfall. While I did remove the entire water section for this tank, the top water pool remains, so they still have access to water if they need it. And I've added some small pools and water sources along the way. We'll dive into that a little bit deeper shortly. Before I start talking about the reasons I removed the water section from this tank, it's really important that you understand that this is a species-specific scenario. Unlike almost all other Geosesarma species, Notophorum molts on land and not in the water. As a result, a large water section is not required, which is something that I've come to understand after a lot of observation. I noticed that the crabs had not entered the water a single time, with the exception of a few events where males fighting in the upper parts of the tank fell down into the water. But as soon as they landed in the water, they were really quick about getting out. This meant that the bottom portion of the tank was essentially wasted space. But before I did make this change, I introduced more personalized water sources, starting with the single bromeliad, which is where Winston comes into this story. Rather surprisingly, the addition of the bromeliad was quite a hit, and overnight it became a hotspot for the crabs, which all started congregating around it. So much so that they began to fight over access to the bromeliad. Winston was the first to claim it, but that didn't last long as his attempts to hold the power were quickly challenged and he was violently ripped apart by another alpha male. This is how I found him the next morning after seeing a light little scuffle the night before. So I've since added quite a few other smaller water sources just to test out this theory, but so far bromeliads still seem to be their top preference. In order to keep as much of the tank viewable as possible, I also opted not to bring the drainage layer to the very front of the tank when I done the redesign. So to pull this off, I reused the sand from the water section as the front half of the tank's drainage layer. While it looks pretty good and I did think about leaving it as a nice sandy beach area, I did notice that the crabs would venture onto it at night and bring all of the dirt and debris from the other part of the tank, so the cleanliness wouldn't last too long. So keeping it nice and white and clean was pretty much out of the question. So a couple of days ago, I decided to add some Monte Carlo, which I'm hoping will carpet the area nicely. It should add a nice bright green layer to the foreground as well, and I'm quite confident it will take hold, as this isn't the first time I've tried something like this. I also moved one of my larger pitcher plants into this tank and placed it in the middle section, but I do have to monitor this situation because I don't want the pitchers to eat any of the babies, though from what I have seen, there's a very good chance that the babies can climb out using their spiky little legs like little ice picks. In the worst case scenario, I'll just snip the pitchers off if I have to. Of all the interesting things that have happened in this tank though, so far the most intriguing is this tangle of roots that has been slowly growing down from one of the branches that I used. When I collected the wood, it appeared to be all but dead, but has since awoken and is slowly making its way to the ground. I have absolutely no idea what kind of tree it might be, but I'm really hoping that it sprouts some new shoots once the roots reach the ground. It could add a really nice dynamic to the tank, but only time is going to yield any answers. While the tank is progressing really well, so too are the crabs, which have been quite busy trying to increase their numbers. The lighting isn't all that great in this shot, and I'm also shooting through some glass with reflections, but you can see a small colour variation between these two, which is quite common with Geosesarma Notophorum. Sometimes their claws are really bright white, and other times they have more of an orange hue or a tinge to them, and this can change over their lifetime as well. They also don't have as big of a claw variation between the sexes as some of the other species, so it's even more important that if you do want to sex them, you need to check their underside to get accurate sexing. This footage is sped up 700 times and the process lasted nearly an hour from when I first saw them going at it. I'm not sure if this is the same female from the footage earlier or another one, but you can clearly see her delicately tending to her eggs, using the water from the bromeliad to hydrate and clean them. She spent over an hour doing this before slowly climbing off into the foliage. Another interesting thing about Geosesarma Notophorum is that the babies will eventually cling to the mother's back in a very similar way to some species of spiders. While I don't have any footage of that at the moment, I'm keeping a really close watch on the tank to see how things progress, because I'd really like to capture some good footage as there's next to nothing decent online. There's a few pictures here and there, but the quality is really poor. If you do want a deep dive on this species, you can check out my full species profile video here, and if you want to see how things progress with the breeding process, make sure you're subscribed. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Cheers everyone!